This is an open letter to Fred Burks. It's in reference to his leadership role in several sexually oriented communities, and also his leadership role in Need to Know, which is a website exploring patterns commonly referred to as conspiracy theories, but looking at the shadow side of our cult on a national and international level, and doing some good investigative journalism in that domain. Fred, I've tried multiple times to put into words and come to some sense of resolution regarding the various areas that I have felt hurt, humiliated, abandoned, betrayed by yourself in our interactions. And it's important, I think, more for people. I think that in addition to whatever official leadership roles that you occupy, that because of your masculinity, your height, your confidence, your assertiveness, and your quick wit, you are viewed in a chauvinistic culture as a leader. People look to you for guidance and for insight in a way that's probably appropriate and at times inappropriate, given your competency. The first breach in our rapport came in group circle. There was, I think it was, his German name was Hellman or Helmet. I noticed feeling tangled up on the inside by the laughter and glossing over of vulnerable topics in that group. And it was by no means just you, but you stand out in the circle as someone who enjoys the wolf-like nature of delight in controversy, of delight in kind of the tearing of the flesh, and I think this is somewhat symbolic of the chauvinistic aspect of our cult, and in the more sociopathic kind of end of the spectrum, that we admire the precision of the wound, the cruelty of the dart, the speed of the insult, and that hurt my feminine side, and so I withdrew. I withdrew from the group. You, I guess, somewhat consistently with that theme at summer camp, were most drawn to me around the Luciferic element, meaning we were having a conversation, and probably in the context of anthroposophy with the Ahrimanic and Luciferic poles, kind of with the Christ in the middle. You know, I talked a little bit about the Luciferic element, and, you know, you asked it to be called L so that other people weren't controversially kind of drawn into, you know, talking about Lucifer. But again, that was the bond, you know, at summer camp at Network for New Culture. I proposed well, you were drawn to that and drawn to me in that level, and I suggested that we explore a terrain of the psyche that I'm familiar with, that I don't usually enter into except with a lover. And you were drawn to that. And I said that it would need, an 8-hour container to provide the space to explore that particular terrain of the psyche together. It would need vulnerability, and it would need a follow-up, meaning it would need at least 8 hours a month to contain a relationship of that intensity. And, the sins of the culture become the sins of the individual. As an American male, there are so many patterns in the energy field that are unconscious because they've never been articulated for me once in my life. And at that time, I could not have articulated early childhood attachment disorder, I think it's called. It's basically the phenomena where both parents abandon the child emotionally and traumatize the child physically in such a way that the child cannot form an attuned relationship with either parent, either the masculine or the feminine pole. This absence of safe connection creates a template pre-verbally where the individual, as they grow up, will tend to default in our cult, because our cult is one of dissociation, independence, and individuality. These are the noble ideals rather than community, bonding, and intimacy. The noble ideals: independence, individuality, separation. I'm fine on my own, Buster. So when you do not learn the regulation kind of medium points on an emotional level, one has to pick a pole. In a cult like ours, it will be isolation. It will be pretended independence. It's actually so much need that you cannot afford to share it with another human being because this cult is incapable of responding at that level as a statistical, very high majority. 99% of your American interactions will not hold that kind of intensity, and so it is dissociated rather than betrayed and dishonored on a daily basis in a helpless state, which is shamed in our cult. I couldn't have said all of that to you at the time. No one had ever said it to me. I hadn't studied the physiology. Who has in this cult? Chauvinists don't study the psyche. They study whether it's sex or money or power or the cruelty of the wound. But I did know, piecing it together from violation and violation, because that's how you learn. In an abuse cult, you learn by being hurt, and you say, oh, okay, I guess I get hurt when I try and bring this part of myself, this more feminine part of myself, to bear in relationship. I get hurt by people who do not have the eyes to understand that feminine terrain in themselves, and thus do not have the eyes to understand it in another. And having violated and participated in the violation within many times, they proceed without any, acknowledgement of the impact to violate others in the same domain. And as long as it's normal to be cruel, as long as it's normal to be sociopathic towards that face of the psyche, to dishonor those boundaries, well, it is, of course, no big deal. We just fit in and feel a sense of unity and belonging as a cult following its memes. I asked for those 8 hours because I understood, without knowing why, that I got hurt deeply when I went into that intimate, vulnerable terrain with another human being and didn't have a strong enough container to hold the immense charge of the light shadow, the possibility field, but also the pain of that wound. What happens in early childhood attachment disorder is the midground. The midground is cut off to the psyche, and you have an on or you have an off. You have the two polar extremes of dissociation and disconnection, or you have an intense bond that in this case is at least 300% more intense than the status quo for our cult. So it is an unusual for our cult strong bond. And to access the regions of my psyche that are sacred, I need to associate. I need to bond. And with the 8-hour container to open up the energy, and the 8 hours requested, negotiated, and agreed to by you, there's the container to hold that level of vulnerability, that level of need, that level of liquidity. And it's important to understand the connection between emotional intimacy and psychological liquidity. Templates get set at very high temperatures, at very high emotional states in our infancy, for the most part. In a traumatic environment, they are set in fear, in terror, in loneliness, and in pain. The templates are set when the emotions in the body are so hot, they liquefy the image, the identity, and in relationship with another human being in that liquid state, they form the shape of the container, the shape of the projection, the shape of the cult template that's being embodied. And then when they cool, they are frozen pre-verbally in that state until a science that our cult has not mastered is able to reestablish the heat and liquidity, and a new container. It's like steel. It takes 4,000 degrees before you can shape steel any way you want to. At 300 degrees, you can wait 10,000 years and it stays the same shape. In a sociopathic cult such as our own, the temperature almost never reaches 3,000 degrees again after the early childhood years, though there is nothing stopping the steel of our image and physiology and template from reshaping. If the temperature is provided, the safety for such a temperature is created and maintained, and a new and more intelligent shape is held in the space such that with the reigniting of the furnace, the reliquefaction of identity in the psyche, a new form can be built. And this is the promise and the draw of every romantic relationship. The externalization of the masculine and feminine voice, initially internalized in the cult template, to reach a heat and an intensity in romantic relationship to a point where the husk can fall away, where the metal can heat and become pliable, where it can liquefy at the pinnacle of that union and reform in a deeper and more powerful way. This is the promise. This is the lure. This is the inductive force towards true romantic chemistry. The shadow side is the default within the cult, to heat up and expose that area and darken the wound to reenact the violation, the betrayal, the dishonor, the abandonment. I could not have said all of this to you at the time either, and you didn't ask. Part of the wound of the masculine in relationship to the feminine, and in our dynamic, I hold the feminine pole, you hold and embody the masculine pole. Part of the dynamic in healthy feminine and masculine energy is that the masculine loves enough to care, cares enough to see, sees enough to understand, understands enough to empathize, empathizes enough to attune, attunes with competency enough to create safety, joy, actually attunes enough to participate in the fulfillment, in the realization of another human being's human needs to survive, to feel secure, to feel a sense of love and belonging. This was the primary dimension of our engagement, to feel a sense of love and belonging, to develop a sense of self-esteem, and to bring one's gifts into the world. You championed my voice at summer camp towards the last of, or level 5 in this hierarchy of needs, and co-facilitating together a particular event. What we're looking at is level 3 and level 4 in the human needs: love and belonging and self-esteem. Around love and belonging, the deepest sense of belonging is present in a relationship when both people physiologically and emotionally understand that the other person's pain and the other person's joy, that the other person's longing and opportunity is weighted equally with one's own. If you are in a circle where the communication of pain elicits a response comparable to the response elicited if each individual in that circle was in the same amount of pain, you know you are in an empathic circle, and you know you belong. When an individual raises a hand in a circle, regardless of its name, that's just cult bullshit. We can call something love, we can call it New Age, we can call it growth, whatever. When an individual raises a hand in a circle and says, this part of my psyche is in pain, at an 8 out of 10 level, and it's in pain because of this and this and this that's going on in the circle, and the circle turns away, the circle wears a mask, the circle scapegoats the individual. Well, what's wrong with you that the instrument of your heart registers pain, that we are the way that we are? Why should we, the majority, attend to you, the minority? Why should the whites take the shackles off of the slaves? Why should the Germans stop incinerating the Jews? Why should we, the majority, why should we in the power structure attune to you in the minority? Why should the masculine serve and attune to the feminine in the other? the persona, the identity that is presented in the space does not belong, is violated, is scapegoated and passed out, or cast out of the circle, when the circle does not respond to the information about the pain or the need or the joy or the desire of the persona that is present. One does not belong in such a circle. Such a circle is incapable of competent love. When the needs are honored, when the attunement is done competently and the need is honored, the empathy of that original impulse of love is honored, there is success. And with that success comes abundance, comes access to new resources inside and out, comes a sense of oneness, comes a lifting from the limbic regions of the brain to the empathic region of the brain, and to some degree, depending on the competency of those involved, the transcendent regions of the brain, where it starts to feel as if we are one. Where your need matters to me as much as my own need, sometimes more. Sometimes it gives me more pleasure to meet your need than it gives me to meet my own, because we are one. And I get to see the smile on your face sometimes with more awareness than I have of the smile on my own face. This is how the virus of love spreads. When love does not spread, it is an absence of the original feeling or a symptom of incompetence. The masculine face of love, which is necessary to make love whole, is competence. When you attune enough to facilitate the survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, realization of gifts, bringing those gifts out into the world, experiencing the abundance, the accomplishment of realizing those gifts, and become a part of something bigger than yourself. Now you have a self-actualized human being, and the gratitude, the joy, the pleasure, the wonder that erupts in the space as one human being supports and stands by another human being on that journey is called love. It's called gratitude. It is authentic and it is spontaneous. You don't need to think, oh, I should be grateful when somebody competently loves you. It's the most natural thing in the world. You don't have to have a gratitude diary. You need that in an incompetent world that's incapable of loving. I understood some of this intuitively, and through a variety of lover experiences had choreographed some of this domain, some of this liquidity. And it was this liquidity that you showed verbal interest in, but stonewalled in the time together. You would not come out of the shell of separateness. But I did. And it felt puzzling to hit your wall. More painful still was within the first few weeks, as I was asking for the container of the next 8 hours, you broke the container. You wanted to go spend time with, I think it's, what was her name? Anyways, the biodanza teacher, Zora. You wanted to go spend time with Zora. And so you broke the container. I couldn't have articulated at the time what you broke. But you broke a part of me that had entered in emotion into a probability field that I made real in the expectation, in the need, in the promise of that container. And when you broke that container, you didn't ask how it affected me. You didn't ask how you could repair the broken container. You didn't ask how it felt. You didn't ask if I needed the container to be broken another way. You explained your need to pursue a relationship with a woman, and that was more important to you than continuing this exploration with me. You were the only man that I had attempted to find this liquidity with, which reenacted the father wound because he was the first. I felt enormous pain, but I'm an American male, and I know I lose rank for having needs in my feminine side. I know I lose rank for being sensitive. I know I lose rank for being emotional. I know I lose rank for asking someone to make something a big deal that is a big deal. And I know that I gain rank from the American lie that says, sure, whatever, don't worry about it, I'm fine. I was not fine in ways that I couldn't begin to understand. There was a strong dagger stuck in to the feminine side that you had asked to see in a somewhat sociopathic state of curiosity. A sociopath has curiosity, but cannot touch what they are curious about. In many ways, a sociopath pursues the feminine side that has been raped in the infancy of a cult that dishonors the feminine from birth. A sociopath is trying to vicariously connect with the feminine side in the other that they cannot see or feel fully in themselves. And in that dissociated state, without conscious intention, there is violation. The wound is on ice. So what would be obvious for an empath is oblivious to a sociopathic state. And I'm not referring to this in the cult derogatory term. Sociopaths survive massive amounts of pain. That's why the reptilian brain exists. But it is important to understand the science of the wound, the science of the psyche, to understand the mechanics, because you can trust a sociopath to stay the course into pain and sometimes face death because they're in the reptilian brain. They may not even be terrified. They may be completely numb. You need and can trust a sociopath to go into painful emotional terrain that no human mind could go into without breaking down. There is a need for the sociopathic quadrant within the psyche to stay alive, to get things done in a sociopathic abuse cult that does not make enduring that amount of pain functional. But we need to map the terrain of the psyche that we are in. Other people need to know what state of the psyche that we are in. For example, for those for whom this is relevant, the amount of pain that I'm in as I make this video, and at this time in my life through sexual abuse that I'll be getting into, puts me about 30% into the sociopathic regions of the psyche. If I did not have that sociopathic, numb, dissociated part of myself to rely on, I could not make this video coherent enough for the American mind to grapple what I'm talking about. So if I want to be heard, I enter the sociopathic region of the brain, because the screaming, the wailing, the beating of the body is not only incoherent in a sociopathic cult, it is incomprehensible. And in the state of fear of the unknown and what we cannot understand, we demean the wound in the feminine. It's what we've been doing for centuries. With the women that enter the wound, we rain down upon their bodies. The women who scream, who rage, we all turn away because we're not willing to face that same pain in our own bodies. The pain that was given to our feminine side in the first months of birth, if not within the womb, as we experienced the bifurcation, the split, and the intense amount of shameful abuse towards everything feminine in this cult, in this country. You told me the story, Fred, of your father trying to beat you down. Why did he need to make you feel helpless? Why did he need to give his helplessness to you and force you to do what he demanded that you do that was against your boundary? And you outwitted him. You found the sociopathic region of your brain that could endure any amount of pain and stood your ground. That sociopath has given you respect, and it has made you an abuser in feminine realms that you lack the humility and competency to navigate and the integrity to honor. You walked away from the container and left me with the shame of knowing that that which was most fragile and precious in me was a burden and an unwelcome voice to you because it interfered with your need to walk away, with your need to avoid responsibility, to avoid seeing, to avoid feeling, and pursue your new curiosity, your new priority. This is the feminine and the masculine wound. The dissociated sociopathic man can imagine sex within 3 seconds of seeing a woman. What would it be like? What would happen if I did this? Could I make her orgasm 3 times? I want to know. Here, do this, do this. Okay, fine, I'll go through the rituals. Come on, it's been 2 dates. Come on. Okay, I want to know. Okay, thank you. I've got that. Now I want to know what would happen if I did this and this and this to you. The sociopathic brain is fascinated, but dissociated in a way that is barbaric, cruel, and stunningly painful to someone in their body in the feminine place. And you have told me about all the women who want to bond with you. Well, this would, of course, be natural in the unconscious reenactment of the wound. My father wasn't around to be bonded to. His greatest fear was feeling. The biggest law in our family was thou shalt not feel, which means thou shalt not tell the truth. The truth always elicits a certain amount of feeling. You're probably feeling something around these words. And this is why the truth must be silenced in a sociopathic abuse cult. Truth always leads to feeling. So when the first law of thou shalt not feel is threatened by truth, the next law is thou shalt not tell the truth. And the next law is okay, fine, you have to tell the truth in your own diary. Do that, fine. Just never tell me. Don't dialogue with me, and certainly don't tell other people. Oh my gosh. I might have to feel in public as a sociopathic, as a chauvinistic male, in a wound, battered down 10,000 times, in order to survive, in order to feel secure, in order to have some semblance of belonging to the straitjacket box of the unemotional, uncommunicative, sociopathic, sex-addicted, workaholic, hard-drinking, hard-playing man. It's a box we're asked to fit into, and that many cannot leave for the fear of not belonging. It's a feminine need to belong, to be accepted, to have rapport. I knew you had hurt me, and I didn't want to make it a big deal. I didn't want to block your freedom. I didn't want to be resented. I didn't see why I shouldn't be able to recover. After all, what you do is 100% normal in an abuse cult where the feminine is dishonored. 100% normal. We've even brainwashed women into thinking that their feminine side is such a burden, is so full of shit, is so shameful, that feeling needy, that feeling like connecting, that opening up and feeling that transcendent union is a dirty secret, is unlovable, has no value. The most priceless human state to enter the transcendent regions of the brain together and become as one, to remember the larger body, the most priceless regions of the psyche with the largest probability and possibility fields, with the greatest amount of power, have been condemned to the slut-shaming gutter talk. We don't want one of those. So-and-so's hot. They've learned to access the sociopathic brain. It's very exciting. You never know what she'll do. She'll tease you, she'll do this, oh, it's very hot. We've got a sociopath on our hand. Her breasts are just the right size. Oh, it's terrific. Terrific. I talked with a woman who had such a beautiful presence that I wanted to make love to her after talking for some hours. And sure, whatever. She went to the bathroom, and she came back out of her body. I said, "Where have you gone?" "What do you mean? I thought you wanted to make love with me." "Yeah, I didn't want you to leave." "Well, guys want me to have sex and like this, and I know what they want. I know how to please them." I said, "I want you in your body." She couldn't do it. She'd learn, with a perfect body, to be the perfect robot for the perfect sociopath who had no interest in seeing her. And I couldn't fault her. I couldn't fault her. Because she said I was the only one who missed her being there. And I thought, you're right, if you're trying to please men stuck in their reptilian brain in a sociopathic, chauvinistic world, teaching you to get in your body, given that I may or may not be around, may be a cruelty. I said, we cannot be partners if you're committed to avoiding your body. I don't want to long to connect with you only to find that as soon as I touch you, you're not there. And this went on for 5 days, and so we separated. We separated because I could not repair the harm that men violating her sensitivity had done. And this is the way you destroy innocence when you break container, when you dishonor the emotional bonds, Fred. It wouldn't occur to you to think it might be a big deal because it wouldn't occur to you to honor the feminine self, because it wouldn't occur to you to go into your own feminine self, to be seen, to feel, and to honor a priceless opportunity to connect in that domain. Connecting with a man is not a priceless opportunity. They're all over the place. You can chauvinistically engage with this one here. You can talk politics with another. That's all over the place. But to connect in the feminine region of the psyche, many men will die in this cult without ever connecting to another man in the feminine domain of the psyche. That's half of who you are, Fred. Half of who you are goes dishonored in that domain, and many of us will die without that connection. But for me, that was a very tenuous, a very fragile, a very vulnerable state that I went into for the first time, inappropriately as it turned out, in response to your curiosity. Because you were the first man to be curious about that domain in a cult that terrorizes and shames men for curiosity in feminine domains. You cannot grow up in this cult watching movies of gay men being beaten up, being dragged behind pickups with chains, being humiliated in public, being treated obscenely, being made fun of by the president. You cannot grow up in an abuse cult without feeling sensitive and frightened of exploring the part of oneself that is the object of so much hatred, so much fear, so much shame, and so much ignorance. And so we don't. But I explored that terrain with you, discussing the possibility of being lovers. And I did feel lonely when you didn't show up as a sensitive counterpart. When you looked with curiosity, show me that state you're talking about, but would not go into it and meet me there in your own body. It's within you. It's within every man and every woman. It's just taboo in a cult that will beat the shit out of you for honoring this part of the self. You hurt me there, Fred. And I tried to get over it, but the wound persisted because it had not been honored. Because it had not been honored. You needed to overlay the reality with it not being a big deal. You needed that so that you could have the freedom to dissociate and do all the other thing you're interested in. UFOs were obviously more important than this. Understanding national conspiracies more important than this. Understanding whether or not the World Trade Center was bombed from within, all more important than loving another man, than honoring a boundary. The most important part to me doesn't fit into the cracks of a life filled with so much dissociative fascination. Because these things may be interesting, but they don't touch the feminine heart any more than looking at another man and feeling nothing. I hinted at sensitive feelings around this for years, and you would forget them, and you never asked, you never understood. It became so painful I asked you not to reach out to me because it reminded me. It reminded me. The deepest pain, of course, is finding myself as a man caught between the desire to tell the truth and honor myself and say, fuck you, Fred, this is not okay. You don't open a container and then ask all those feelings to go back in a bottle so that you can break the container in a 5-minute phone call and off you go. Fuck you for thinking that's okay. You're a sociopath, so you don't care. Maybe this anger is interesting, a little bit entertaining. A sociopath cannot understand impact in the feminine side of himself or another. I wouldn't expect you to weep for the harm that you caused, for the harm we created together, because I have my own sociopath who goes along for the ride. I'm not saying there's a disconnection between the sociopath in me and the sociopath in yourself. In many ways, you are the embodiment of the sociopathic choices that I make to try and fit into an abuse cult that hurts me in the feminine side. Because being completely isolated hurts even more. You've never honored this wound, Fred, and maybe you never will. You cut me off and didn't want to talk about anything. The conversation was over because I was criticizing you. And of course, it wouldn't be worth your time to come over and repair things and make amends and really understand the terrain because, well, there's another UFO sighting. There's another world. There's so much stuff to do. And now you're exploring sex and tantra and da-da-da. And this is one of the reasons this video is important. You're now exploring sex and tantra and will be viewed in this cult as a leader and are teaching in a leadership role at times. That means every area that I'm referring to that is a chronic blind spot for you, you are going to hurt your own feminine self and another woman's feminine self, and you're going to have no more clue how to navigate that wound. You're going to puncture and cause blood, but you're not going to dress the wound because you don't understand it, because you're too pathologically narcissistic, arrogant, and sociopathic to study the wound and learn how to dress it if you insist on causing it. We are a nation of attachment disorder. We are a nation of people stuck in the reptilian brainstem. We are a nation of latent trauma. 1 in 3 women have had sexual abuse before 18. Almost every woman in this cult has been sexually abused. And you want to lead and teach without a questionnaire, without an emotional abuse intake, without bothering to see what you need to do to attune with competency to create love rather than peak erotic moments, which become sources of rage, bitterness, and cynicism when the emotional container that goes with those moments is violated, is denigrated, is downplayed. You want the one without the other. You don't want to clean up your mess. You don't want to see. You don't honor the container that is sacred to someone who understands the full psyche. And that's the beginning of the wound. Every time I'd get an email and I'd say, I don't want to hear from you, it doesn't feel good for you to beat up my Mercedes with a baseball bat, to not ask how much it costs to repair, to walk away as if it was no big deal, and leave me to clean up the pieces, feel the pain, and pull myself together so that you don't have to keep your commitment. The honorable thing to do would have been to come to me and ask and spend time to learn how it impacted me. And ask how to bring things down in a way that would help me feel safe and feel honored. To go through that process and ask how it felt. And then separate with honor. You made a commitment. You broke your commitment in the first month. You left me to clean up your mess. These psychological births that occur are no different than a physical pregnancy. Perhaps you'd get a woman pregnant and leave her to clean up the abortion, take the pill, see psychologists to deal with the depression and grief because you decided not to have the child. Many men do. Why should they be bothered with holding a container for the third energy that is born? That hurt me, Fred. It hurt me deeply. And you've never apologized. You've never understood. More importantly, you never wanted to allocate the time to see enough to understand enough to empathize, to empathize enough to attune, and to attune enough to be successful at generating well-being for your partner. You sign your emails with best wishes, but it's not really a best wish to be beaten over the head with a baseball bat and left to pay your own medical bills. That's how you leave me feeling, Fred. I'm pissed, I don't trust you, I'm angry, and I'm concerned for the women in your circle. There has never been an interaction that leads me to believe that you are competent to love in deeply feminine terrain. And that means you, she, or he is being hurt. And in this cult, you are not going to get this feedback from an American. Where on earth would we find the language, let alone the paradigm, or grapple with why on earth would I want to be vulnerable enough to stand up for strange women by abusive men who insult and shame me? Why would I want to do that? You've got decent sides, Fred. You've got decent goals. You've got decent values. You may operate as a sociopath much of the time, but you're doing it for things you believe in. Your goals are not sociopathic. You have the intelligence, the discipline, and perhaps the courage to go into this terrain if you want to. And to the degree that you touch other people in your life, they will benefit and this culture will benefit because of your growth. You asked me many times, you want someone to tell me your shit. Well, I didn't see your shit at the time. But when I finally did, you walked away. Tell me my shit. I want someone who tells me my shit. Here's your shit, Fred. Enjoy. I reached out to you in a leadership role. It's, by the way, this betrayal dynamic, this betrayal, hurt, violation dynamic is sensitive for anyone in my state. Anyone that doesn't have strong attachments, because no one can handle the intensity of the full on. And it's full off or full on. Americans don't like full on, which means dissociation. I reached out to you when Sasha and Janet with the polyamory thing. I'd signed up for the workshop. Only to practice facilitation. You know, that people had liked the appreciation workshop I did, and I wanted to practice facilitation in front of like 40 or more people rather than just 15. So I paid $200 because that's kind of the setup, you know. Anyway, I wanted to practice facilitation. And I did it on condition, since that was the only reason I was going, to be one of the speakers that spoke in front of the full room. So we had that all in writing, and that was fine. So I paid my $200. And the schedule comes out. And I'm not in front of a full room. My ex-girlfriend, who loves to compete with me anytime I do something, that's her chance to jump in and try and compete. Anyway, that's what she likes to do, and that's why we're not together. So my ex was, surprise, surprise, sitting opposite. So I don't know if it was a conscious thing. I'll only join if I get to teach at the same time Dane is or whatever, who knows. But, anyway, there she is. And I ask for a refund. The last thing I want to do is pay $200 to compete with my ex. You broke your container. And of course, Sasha and Janet, in the general run around for money, said, oh, you should have come and you should have worked it out. But I don't like fighting, and I don't need to. And I don't see why I should go and learn from teachers who can't keep their promise in writing and blah, blah, blah. It's just bullshit. I suggested outing this to the community. You didn't think it was a good idea, Fred. So I stayed silent. I didn't get my money back. I didn't go to the workshop. And I was violated in that way by leaders teaching healthy relationship, polyamory. I mean, everyone wants to be a teacher in a chauvinistic cult because, teachers are better than students, right? Doesn't make any sense mathematically. It makes sense culturally. How's a teacher any use if there are no students? They're equal. But anyway, in rank in our cult, we want to be the teacher, right? And so anyway, there was your silence. I didn't have anyone to turn to when Peter Sandhill, a Human Awareness Institute facilitator, sexually abused me under the influence of my first psychedelic experience. A psychedelic experience that I decided to have in a certain amount of desperation. I've never done recreational drugs, never been drunk, never been drawn to being out of control. When you're hurt and traumatized as a child, you don't want to be out of control, at least I don't. But I was suicidal. I was suicidal because the feminine in part of me could not find honor or a single secure connection in this cult. And that includes you, Fred. Could not find a single secure connection in this cult with honor. And that's no way to live. You're below an animal when you can't meet your third need for love and belonging. And that's something I have not been able to do with you. I've not been able to do with a single American male. I've not been able to do sustainably in this cult. Because these betrayals hurt too much to pretend they don't matter. They kill chemistry. I turned to all of the Human Awareness Institute facilitators who decided in one meeting in which I was the only person not invited that this had nothing to do with the Human Awareness Institute, that the facilitator that they had trained, chosen, and recommended to me without caveat had sexually abused me as my high facilitator and twice over a 10-year period. That it was not a high issue, but that they would like me to sign an abuse contract promising never to tell anyone what happened. This was so outrageous, so devastating, so betraying. It collapsed my body, and with it, my finances, my ability to work. And I tried to start a nonprofit to kind of fund a response to this, atrocity. Because in our culture, we have to tax all the money we spend on community-oriented activities, which is sociopathic, unless you have a nonprofit. So I formed a nonprofit. I couldn't find my one American male acquaintance at the time said that spending 30 minutes a year to have a nonprofit meeting was too much of a commitment for him. I couldn't find an American to be on the board. So I went overseas. I found more intelligent human beings overseas. And I was calling you to tell you, Fred, everything that had gone on in this community. And here's the thing, Fred. You think the need to know is important enough to dedicate a large part of your life telling other people's stories on a national and international scene, which of course have nothing to do with you. Zero. But you are a secret keeper and silencer and discourager of information dissemination at a local level around no less heinous, disgusting, sociopathic crimes in your very community. This has got to stop, Fred. If you have to choose between another letter published on your website about the World Trade Center bombings or the data that leaders in your community affecting your lovers and your people are sexually abusing clients for money under the influence of psychedelics, and you do nothing? That's a little bit inverted. Don't you matter enough to have people in your life that are healthy? How are they going to be healthy when you cover up the secrets of professional abuse? When it never occurs to you to publish that information in your city? Who gives a fuck about the World Trade Center if we're covering up sexual abuse by teachers of love and intimacy in our community? It's inconsistent, it's irrational to be the silent one here and the loud one out there. And the reason is they are connected. If you cover up the things here, it teaches that secrets and abuse that is covered up works. Who do you think are the people committing all of your conspiracies? People like you and me who watched their entire community collude in silence, in shame, in denial, and in a sociopathic lack of response to profound violations in the psyche, profound violations in the community. It didn't really matter. Judith Herman, in her book on traumatic recovery, points out the problem politically with the bystander. A man rapes a woman and someone watches. The woman asks for help. The rapist doesn't ask for anything. The bystander has to take sides. It's kind of hard to be neutral when you're watching someone being raped. They have to take sides. On the one hand, they could go head-to-head with another man. A power structure could take time. Maybe their suit would get dirty. Maybe they'd be punched in the nose. Who knows? Not a very pleasant thought. On the other hand, they could walk away. They could walk away. And our bystanders in our cult, including you, Fred, walks away. You walk away rather than tell the truth about local news. You walk away without uncovering the local conspiracy. You lie by omission. You don't tell your lovers about how you behave when you have a new fad. You don't stand up to the people in your circle. You knew Sasha and you knew Janet, and you said that sounds like them. When you stand by and let leaders in our community abuse participants and abuse clients in our community in the most sacred realms of feminine terrain, you're blessing the national abuse cult that grows out of dysfunctional sociopathic leaders in our communities who, having abused enough at a local level, become ambitious and head to Washington, where they reenact the same abuses they participated with your silence at home, with world-changing consequences. It's a fractal pattern, and you understand enough to know that if you don't change the issue locally, you create it nationally. I desperately wanted someone that I told, of all the Americans that I told, to say, I'm with you on this. How can I help? You discouraged me from the nonprofit and the app, thinking it wouldn't work. That was your contribution to an hour-long expose about what was going on and what was doing. Have you told a soul? Are you complicit? Are you complicit, Fred, in the lovers you may meet in your communities, which are closely linked with high, because you didn't tell them what was going on? If they are raped, if they are abused, if they are shamed, if they are warped with sick messages about what love is and what love is not, will you blame them, or will you take responsibility for your silence and collusion? I request, Fred, a public video in response to this. I don't trust you in private, and I don't want to pay therapy for your fuck-ups. I request that you take a public stand in sending the information about the Human Awareness Institute abuse to everyone in your community in a leadership role. And I request that you not dissociate your interest in conspiracies and all that stuff from our community, but recognize that people look to you for leadership. Recognize that there are as intricate and bizarre and sociopathic patterns happening in you, in your partners, in our community, as there is in Washington. And that you make the story relevant. Tell the narrative. Tell the narrative. If you can cry for my pain in this terrain, I may even trust you and collaborate with you to tell the narrative. Here's how they did it at the World Trade Center. Here's how they did it at High. Here's how I do it. Here's how our community stands by and participates in pathological, sociopathic, chauvinistic, and sexual abuse to ourselves. And let someone else do it in order to be more mature, in order to be, cool and hip. Sure, we can have sex. Oh, what's the big deal? I'll just dissociate my feelings, drink a little bit, pretend nothing happened. I'm cool. I can abuse myself as well as the best of them. This is a narrative that's worth telling, Fred. You have the intelligence and the sociopathic capacity to go into this pain without being fazed by it. You may not have the ability to honor this pain with tears, but you can learn that with the same determination as you left the wound as a little boy, escaping the abuses and the cruelty of his father.